Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Copy and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin, and I'm excited for my conversation today. My guest today is Clark Sell. Clark, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Clark Sell, as Isaac said. Let's see, father, husband, two kids, teenagers, geek, write code, own two companies. What else? What else needs to get said?
I think that's pretty good. I think, one of the things we were talking about before we got started is like this world that we're trying to navigate. But before I want to get into that, I want to talk a little bit about kind of how you got started in tech, because I think a lot of
Mhm.
people might find interest, right? Like for folks who might not know you, you have a very interesting kind of path with tech, and I'd love to kind of hear like about your origin story. What was one of the things that kind of when you first came to tech or when you first saw tech, and you're like, this is it. This is what I want to spend the rest of my life doing.
Yeah, I don't tell that story much. So I grew up in a very low income town. It was a ghetto, if you will. There are worse ghettos, but it wasn't a great place to live. I would, when I was young, I was working on cars. I was putting in car stereos and slinging cell phones and whatever I could do to make some money out of garage tint windows.
Sure.
And I really liked that creative piece. How do you make a car your own or a truck your own? This was back in the day of lowriders. So we were putting neon on things and slamming cars on the ground. And my dad he was an engineer at companies like Zenith and whatnot, but I had like zero desire to do anything with said computers. I was going to work on cars, and so my parents made me go to college, which was a good decision. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I was flunking out the first couple of years, and I don't want to say I got my shit together, but turned it around and graduated with this IT degree, like an
Sure.
MIS degree.
Yeah.
And I was doing the whole interview thing, I'm going to go get that corporate job and chase that corporate life because that's what we were kind of told to do. And ended up getting a job at a little place called Allstate Insurance Company on some
Sure.
year 2000 work. And I can remember telling the vice president at the time I would never code anything to do with it. And he just laughed. And he said, okay, sure. And he hired me. And about a couple of months in, here I find myself, I was programming away, trying to automate the hell out of test cases because I knew a little bit about code from school, but the reality was I wasn't about to do this. So I figured, well, I'm just going to write some code to do this for me. And then I always thought the internet was cool. And it just kind of went from there. I mean, even today, I still look at software as this thing that enables humans.
Yep.
So when I think about, I don't really get into the theory and like that kind of shit. I just don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
I like that you can take a computer or a bunch of tech, you can write some software and make your life easier. And if that's connecting people, I mean, obviously I'm passionate about that piece of it, but computers are there to make us be better, make us make decisions faster. So
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I've slammed the drum a few times about like it's important to know technical concepts and all these sort of things,
yeah,
but
totally.
99% of the jobs out there that exist are trying to solve some business problem, right? And most of them are the same problem, just from a different lens, right? I have some
Yep.
data. I want to be able to expose this data in a particular way or do something based with this data and
Yep.
go on my merry way, right? Um,
Yeah. I mean, people
yeah,
get so hung up on like the right language and the right stack. And I'm always like, look, the stuff that ships and makes revenue, that's the stuff that counts.
yeah,
Everything's got bugs in it. Everybody makes mistakes. You know, what's shipping, what makes money, that's what pays the paychecks. That's what lets us do this kind of stuff.
yeah. And I think one of the things that's interesting, especially in your case around this, is that you obviously are a technologist. You have written code. You've done a lot of stuff, but you've transitioned into this role of community builder. But you still write a ton of code. Like I'd love to kind of figure out how you kind of navigate those two personas so well.
Well, I'll be the first to say that I don't know that I necessarily do.
Sure.
Uh, I certainly work too many hours in a day, and I don't have the best kind of balance. Um, but I also am in this place where all the things are fun and enjoyable. So while I own a company and play salesperson and marketing person and cheerleader and all that, we're also small. There's only three of us, and
Yeah.
that means doing what you do well, making sure that others are doing what they do well, um, getting help from others. So my weeks are, I'd say driven by the business a bit. We try to plan out when my time should be focused on sales or something like that, business related, versus when we got to get rocks out the door and bugs fixed. And, my week last week got hijacked due to some profile issues and caching things. And the next
Hmm.
thing I know, 3 days went by and we've been banging out code trying to fix the platform. And um, I I would love to say, a PR a day keeps the doctor away.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
I I probably write code half of the week. It
Hmm.
depends.
Yeah.
My GitHub profile is pretty green.
I mean, yeah, and I think it's funny that you bring up like the GitHub profile green thing, right? Like there's been so much I guess
Yeah,
conversation on both sides of like what does that mean? And but I think in your case, like, you're a development team of very small, right?
yeah,
And to be able to work in the cadence or that you need, like, yeah, your stuff is going to be green. But there also might be gaps where it's basically zero because, like you said, you do want to
yep.
spend time with your family and all of that. And I think it's okay for all those things. I think what
It
people get
is.
really hung up on is like they want to feel like they want there's this perception that your GitHub profile is like a resume when it's problematic to
It's
say the
not.
least.
No. I mean, I think it's also people should be aware, like, we ship probably daily.
Yeah.
Um, whether it's on the back end or the front end, we built a platform such that it's very automated, and if there's something little that can be fixed, like, we're not going to wait around. Like, that thing's going to get done,
Yep.
tested, and it's going to hit the branch and it's gone. So, you know, lots of teams could work that way. We're also not saving babies. So if I take the platform
Sure.
down, right, my risk profile is angry people,
Yep.
not people dying. So, our change management, my fleet of testers is, considerably different than most. But
Yeah.
you're right. There's a lot of other things that go into who you are as a person, and I think also who you are as what's represented in your source. Like, we have to make decisions at times that maybe aren't the best,
Sure.
knowing full well that we may change it later on, or
Yep.
maybe pull the feature and thus don't want to spend a bunch of time on it. And so, we always try to kind of write the best thing that won't shoot us in the foot. But at the same token, sometimes you just got to ship and say,
Yeah.
is this going to work? Like, how will people even react to it? What will be the backlash? Will it even be used? I mean, we have stuff on the site that has never been used, and we've gone back and just pulled it because, well, it's not being used.
Yeah. I've said this many times, like the business doesn't care about the architecture, right? Like the business
Nope.
doesn't care about like there's some things that are, I guess, um high level principles that the business does care about, like performance or user experience and things like that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like to your point, like sometimes you just gotta get stuff out there with the knowledge and knowing that what you're sending out there right today might be completely different than what you send out, in a month, and that's
Oh yeah.
okay. It's I had a colleague right when I was getting started in software development say, all we really are is painters, and if I go in and I show up and the boss says, well, I want you to paint the barn red, and I spend all day painting the barn red. And then I go in the next day and the boss is like, well, actually, I want the barn white. You can't say, no, I don't want to paint that barn white. I just painted it red. The requirements have changed. So you have
Yep.
to be that good little worker bee. Maybe you push back a little bit and get some more understanding. But at the end of the day, you're going to paint that barn white, and you have really no
Yep.
choice.
Yeah, and I think that's where, from an architecture perspective, which I still consider myself software architect to some degree. Um, I think that's where you try to design things so that we're going to paint this a few times. So if I'm going to
Yep.
paint it, I don't want to have to rebuild the back end or whatever, the frame of the
Yep.
barn, to use your analogy. Um, and sometimes you know that stuff, and sometimes you don't. Uh, it's interesting. We've been in. This is my first like real open source project, and I say real because it's everything is there. Everything is, um, there's a lot of effort that's been put into it, um, and the things move fast, and so keeping up with all the different teams that are making their changes and the downstream changes and whatnot. It's an interesting world to navigate when you're trying to kind of build your product. Meanwhile, the rocks that you've built
Yep.
on are building theirs, and they're moving and shifting and making the same decisions you are. It's a very, very um, it's fun. It can be stressful, mind you. We're on some beta stuff. we're
Sure.
most,
Yeah.
it seems like
Yeah.
we're always on something that's beta, but again, we're not saving babies, so we can be.
Yeah. And it's really funny that, and I don't know of any other, maybe there's some other industries that do this, but it feels to me like tech is very dependent on not just the work of others, but the unproven work of others, which I think is very, very interesting, right? Like you'll see like some GitHub repository that has like, thousands and thousands of stars, and you can tell that it gets cloned a lot and gets used a lot. And you look at it and you're like, interesting. I don't know if
Yep.
this is the best approach, and it's not my place to judge. But I think in
Yep.
general, like we are so dependent on anybody doing work, because if we had to do all the work for the entire thing ourselves, like from writing, React components on a page all the way down to like the assembler, like nobody would get anything done. And I think
I
it's really,
mean,
really interesting.
I think that's a bit of a fault of our own.
Yeah.
Terms like full stack got introduced. Terms
Yeah. Yeah.
like I mean, the global outsourcing and people's labor rates per hour, the ability to just horrible planning and trying to get shit done yesterday leads you down these paths of, well, this package is done, right? I got
Yep.
Joe Boss is up my ass to get this stuff done, and am I going to write it or am I going to use it?
Yep.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of cases where you should write it. Like that should have been, you know, are people even looking at the licensing of some of these things, right? I've seen some
Yeah.
pretty dumb decisions, and on the flip side, I've seen amazing decisions, right? Where you got things like Svelte and React and um, GraphQL. I mean, those are all Node. Those are all foundational pieces that have enabled the industry to move in ways that it may have never thought it would move before. So,
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting, right? Like you mentioned a couple of technologies that I think are specifically interesting because they're created by larger organizations with the goal in solving some business problem. And that turned into movements in the technology space. So it's like now we use this, right?
yep,
Like you can point
yep,
to like every major framework, like not every, but basically
yeah,
every major
yep,
framework. And even though it's open source and the entire team and all of the roadmap and the backlog, everything is on GitHub, company X still built that for their
yep,
particular use case, and they dictate what happens with that particular
totally.
technology. And I
That's
think
right.
it's very interesting because you'll see decisions that are sometimes made that are very beneficial to that particular entity that may
Yep,
not be as valuable to the open source community that might be adopting it. And let's be real, like most developers out there when they're using open source, they're not doing it to build other open source technologies. They're doing it to because I need a JSON serializer, or I
Yep.
need to be able to hook up to React events better.
Yep.
And I don't want to do it myself, so I'm going to use this thing for my job. And it's a very
Yep.
interesting conundrum that I think people get into.
Yep. It
I,
is.
I think one of the things I'd love to talk with you about too is obviously you created this entity, right? This that brand, right? And to be completely transparent, I think that is the best name for anything. So kudos to your brand folks to figuring that out. Just because the conversations are always great. I'm going to that conference. Oh,
Yep.
like what's the name of that conference? No, the conference is named that conference.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that was part of it. But like the idea of being a conference organizer or a conference founder or whatever you want to label yourself as, like there's is somebody who comes from a development background. I imagine there's a substantial amount of things that you had to learn along the way. And I'd like to kind of understand like what was probably the most challenging thing for you to wrap your head around. Like as a developer or an architect, like technology is probably something that's come if not fairly easy, like straightforward to you, or you've had a motivation to do it. But some of these things like are completely outside of your comfort zone, I imagine. And I'd love to kind of hear how you navigated that world when you first get into it.
Yeah. I mean, the world's changed a lot. So we started the business 12 years ago. And I think we went into the first year blind. We had great intentions. Um, and we were naive. And like any startup, I think that's almost a blessing, is that you're naive to the things that you don't necessarily know about. And thus you don't put a lot of effort or cycles into worrying. The first year for us, it took us 2 years before the event kicked off. And it was about getting people there.
Yeah.
Financially, it was a train wreck. We walked in $20,000 upside down. Back then, the event was, I think, 90, maybe 110,000. And we walked out of there. There were a litany of things that ended up happening that kind of balanced things out. But thankfully, we walked out, I think, with $5,000, which ironically was what we started the whole thing with. And it was then where it was like, okay, well, this needs to be treated as a business.
Yeah.
It's part passion, it's part service, and it's part business. And back then that was, how do we make sure we have a budget? How do we manage expenses? Like, let's not get into year two with another $20,000 kind of monkey on your back. Most people don't really realize you sign a lot of contracts, and sometimes they're multi-year, 5-10 year contracts. Like they're huge commitments.
Sure.
And your liability is kind of all of your stuff. There is no thing where you're like, your company is, like you've been sheltered from it. I have to pay up front before we walk in. That's
Sure.
the way it works. Cash on hand, some cases, some things have, net 15s, net 30s, but for the most part, you pay before you walk in. And, if you think of those three personas, I think the one that's been the hardest struggle is to make it financially viable.
Sure.
We unfortunately, AKA, I would say developers tech, are a little bit too cheap.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of things are free, but they also cost money. Like if you want to see, it's great that Facebook made GraphQL. It's great that, React was made by Facebook. Like they have plenty of money. They can afford to give it away.
Yep.
But there's a lot of people who are slinging open source and are doing things where they don't have the money. And now your business is dependent upon them. And, a cup of coffee would go a hell of a long way.
Yeah.
And so it was probably around year 5 that we were faced with a few, like, do we close it down? It was really consuming a lot of time. And had 2 jobs then. I got 2 jobs now. And it was, what do we do? This gets bigger every year. If you want to say it's in another 100,000, how do you make this such that our service people become dependent upon the service. So if we went away, people's like new business went away. People were going to lose jobs. And that started to weigh on me really, really heavy. I never really thought we would be, I don't want to say a cornerstone because that seems very pompous, but
Sure.
I just never thought people would be dependent upon us.
Yeah.
And the reality was not just the people that became dependent upon us, but the staff, the local gas station, in the Dells were known as the tree people. Like people fight to work that week.
Yeah.
Everybody comes up, and that's something else, right? That's a big kind of thing to bear.
Yeah.
So Carrie and I started, what does it mean? What would happen if we went all in? What would happen if we were able to hire people? Like how much better would the service be? How much more could we do? Could we have impact beyond the Midwest? Could we have impact beyond the US? Could we help facilitate people's jobs and kids to college? Like if there was more money, what would we be able to do? And so we spent a number of years trying to get things right. I don't want to say right-sided, but in a place where there was some money in the bank and we could hire somebody. And we started acting in those plans in 2019. I mean, it was 4 years of kind of prep and things to do. And of course, 2020, the toilet flushed. So,
Sure.
My passion is people. I like connecting people, and we look at the platform as a mechanism to help do that at scale. So we take our skills. I think we have a bit of a superpower because we built our own stuff. Many people have told me that's completely stupid. But I feel like it gives us a way to do something unique and different that hasn't been done before in ways that haven't been done. So we did it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're being very in this is just me being observant, I think, is that you're being a bit modest with like what you meant by like what you've created, right? Like I don't know of many very, very small development shops or organizations that do conferences like build like a SaaS solution around online events, technical communities, right? So I think that that's something to say that like you saw an area of kind of that was missed and kind of embracing that. Like obviously I know a lot of it was probably triggered by the pandemic and kind of the hesitancy to do in-person events, at least for a little bit of time. But what were some of the other things that you took into account when you were looking to build that.us?
That's a great question. Actually, it's the exact opposite. In 2019, we were doing a bunch of planning around what would the next 10 years of that conference be. How could we really, now that we thought we were financially viable, at least at that time, we had somewhat of a business plan that said we could do this and this is where we would grow. And back then we were talking about Texas as well. That had started at this point 5 years ago. We were planning and doing design work as to what now is that.us. And there were a lot of like just open-ended questions that we weren't sure how we were going to answer. We knew we needed a new platform. We wanted to just hit delete on everything and kind of move on. And we started doing that kind of late 2019. And then the pandemic came. And what that actually did for us was it opened a window of time to actually go do it. I don't know that we would be where we are today as fast as we were if we didn't have the chance to focus on it. Not putting on an event. Now, while that's cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, not putting on an event meant we could go after our original vision, and start to tackle it. And so instead of sitting back and kind of hitting pause,
Sure.
we went all in and said, all right, we have a limited amount of time. What are the big things that we can get done? How fast can we get them done? What will that be at a place that we can, one, service the community, and two, service ourselves? So that.us facilitates the in-person event. It does online stuff, tickets, profile, like the whole 9 yards. Job listings. There's a lot of automation and social media and business reporting, like all that shit. And we lined up the pieces that we needed to get done, and we just started building and put it out as fast as we can so we could get user feedback and see how it would work. And when we were able to do Wisconsin last year, I mean, I was still coding hours before shaking hands because things were not done. And today we're selling tickets, and there's still a few things that are not done that those ticket holders will need to do. And every month, every week, every month, we get another big piece done, another rock done, and it feels a little more complete. And then we can modify and refactor and pivot. And but it is a big ass platform. Like it is. There's a lot there, a lot that people don't realize.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I spoken at that conference a few times, and I love the that.us community, so I'm a bit biased when I talk about how great this stuff is. I've also seen, like, gotten emails from Clark where it's like, oh, by the way, this thing that you tried to do just doesn't work right now, so try again in a couple hours, right? And that's makes me feel really happy because I know that as a developer, the challenge with shipping software that just works the first time is like is very very challenging, right? So if I get an email saying, "Oh, by the way, like there's a bug. Thanks for being my tester," like that, it just makes me feel really warm inside. Maybe that's just me.
No, I think it's interesting having an audience of developers because on one hand, I'll get, your shit is slow. Why would I do this? Blah, blah, blah. You seem like you're being catchy. And it's like, here's the GitHub repository. You are more than welcome to look through all of this stuff. You can come and join. Is it slow? Hell yeah, it's slow. There are places that suck, like working on it.
Yeah.
But, one day, like it was 2 weeks ago, suddenly there was edge caching, right? And the API, we shaved off, I don't know, 300 milliseconds. And like, that was an amazing day, followed up by bugs, right? That was like, and we got to fix this.
Yeah. I mean, it is, and if for folks who aren't aware, I'm just going to paste into the chat. It's that.us. And like, and for, at least for me, like just the whole thought of like building that with myself and a few other developers, it like the mountain, I assume initially when you were first thinking about it, was like, this is very very big. And I imagine there was areas that you're like, we need this because it's going to help us in this particular area. But from your perspective, like, what is the one thing that you'd like to add to it? And every single time you get down this path of trying to do it, you're like, something happens, right? Whether the tech doesn't work the way you want it to, or something non-work related or work related even gets in the way. Like, what are some of the things that you'd love to add to it?
So, well, let's give people a little bit. Let's give a little bit of context because that'll help understand why this is important. So my vision with that.us and that conference in general really is, we have created the largest kind of facilitated unconference in the world. So my goal is, 1 million developers are on our platform. I think there's this unique mechanism today where our tech has gotten substantially better, and the way we can help one another is simply like this unstructured conversation that we can look at one another and be authentic. But the reality is we can do that anytime. But finding one another to go do that is really hard. And I think there's this point in time where you're like, shit, I have this issue and it's so niche or whatever, and there's so much context. Wouldn't it be great if I could just get online and code share and talk to somebody or talk to a few people? Or what if I was a college student? I was like, I want to hear from a bunch of web devs. Like, what
Yeah.
is the world really like, right?
Yeah.
And these are scenarios that happen, on that.us. And so if you think of it as a little bit of Twitch, a little bit of Stack Overflow, a little bit of Meetup, a little bit of Slack, we're this kind of thread throughout. And oh, by the way, there's this in-person conference where, we curate, right, a bunch of people to come together and have essentially the similar conversation, but at a higher density, right?
Yeah.
Let's pack the room. Let's do more kind of faster all in, and then we can disperse and we can continue to do that. And if you and I meet, I don't want the conversation to end because we both left the town. Like
Yeah.
it would be great if we could just jump back on that and
Yep.
continue to kind of go and do it. And so for us to get there, that meant we needed to deal with profiling, security, profiling being your profile, not profiling you. Security, scalability, dates and times, which sounds silly, but if you're going to
No.
be international, right, you kind
So
of have to deal
hard.
with it
Time is
internationally.
so hard. Yeah.
Yep. And, a lot of automation and things that, planning a conference is super laborious. Like you have to send out lists on t-shirts. Well, when you got 2,000 t-shirts to buy of, this color and this size and this and that, like, sit there and spend days doing that crap.
Yeah.
So that's some of the stuff that happens in the background. So where we sit today is we can do the scheduling, we can do the registration, we can do the tickets, we can do a lot of all that. The thing that we haven't gotten to yet, and that I don't know how to do, is the AI piece. So the AI piece is this: you, Isaac, like this, I like this. We're going to go meet at this. I want to talk about this. I want the platform to go tell you, if you're the right person,
Sure.
that, hey, you might be interested in this, or this group, or this guy's looking for a speaker, or that group over there is
Yeah.
looking for a speaker, and let the platform do the work for you so that your kind of effective reach is global. And we have a lot of the pieces there. We have a lot of the foundation in the back end. And we're starting to have conversations with some AI folks, but
Yeah.
There's still these other rocks that the business has to get done
Sure.
before we can get to that piece. So there's, part of the reason the scheduling is the way it is because I don't want to change it until I know more about the AI piece, because it'll influence maybe what that UI looks like. So,
Sure.
I'd love to say, like, originally I thought we'd be getting to it this year. Texas got pushed to May, then July. So it's like, is that going to happen kind of after Wisconsin? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, is it crass to say that you're trying to like invent this concept of tech matchmaking, nerd matchmaking? Is that too crass to say? I mean, it's kind of like it's a problem that I see that's pretty spot on. Like even something as simple as like matchmaking for careers, right? Like that's very interesting to me because I think everybody can attest that like the current way we go about looking for and staffing jobs is broken, especially
Yep.
when every single job gets 1,000 applicants. And at the same time, we have like a surplus of technology jobs that can't be filled because of many reasons. But also like this, just finding people with shared mindsets, right?
Yeah.
Like and to transition to that conference a little bit and talk about some of the things that I think are really important to call out about that conference is that you create these areas for people to have conversations with people they also enjoy having conversations with, right?
Yep.
Like I jokingly tell people who are guests on this show, I don't do this for anybody else other than me because I feel like the best way for me to grow is to have conversations with people from all different walks of life with different viewpoints because it helps me grow as a person.
Totally.
And one of the things that I think I really appreciate about that conference particularly is that you have this whole concept of the sessions are just one small part of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and I imagine there was probably a lot of thought around what are some of the other ancillary quote unquote features of this event that we think we can really bring value to our attendees and our sponsors. Like, what are some of the things I can think of a couple of them, but like, what are the ones that are most pertinent to you?
Well, I think the important part is to know where you sit in the industry as a whole,
Sure.
right? Like Microsoft has millions of dollars they can throw away on a conference. They also have resources that can go and tell it from product engineering teams that can say this is how it works and this is why it works. That's great. I can't compete with that. Like we're not in that boat.
Mm-hmm.
We're in this boat of or we consider ourselves in this place of exposure. I
Sure.
think we all have something that we can give. Now, a lot of people feel like they have nothing to give, but your personal experience is equally, if not more important than maybe the product engineer who built the thing, because
Sure.
you have context and how it worked with what you do. So when I talk to folks about that conference or like a sponsor, I say that our job is to like build this platform and kind of create opportunities for different behaviors. So I think of a keynote as something that's to inspire people. We all get beat down throughout the year. A lot of people have just forgotten why they even got into tech in the first place. If I can take 3 hours of time at that conference and get you re-inspired about the craft that exists, then I feel like we've recentered you in a way
Sure.
to kind of like go find your love again, right?
Yeah.
I think of sessions as this great networking opportunity because there's two things that everybody has in common when they go to a session. They're either there for the speaker or the topic,
Yep.
and there's somebody next to them that's either there for the speaker or the topic. So
Yeah.
there's no reason you can't have a conversation. And that speaker's job, if you will, is to share their context, their experience. And some of that's educational, some of
Sure.
that's humor, some of that is just raw exposure. But in an hour's time, you're not going to become an expert.
Yeah.
You're going to get to know something and you're going to make some contacts, right?
Yep.
The speaker, maybe the person next to you, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it continues into an open space. And so you have that. We have workshops, we have open spaces, we have the hallway. They're all, dare I say, engineered such to try to promote a behavior. Like we
Yeah.
decorate the place so it doesn't feel like a convention center.
Sure.
Like, and that's, um, it's all intentional, right? It's intentional to hold back sessions so that we can have open spaces so people can talk about the things
Yeah.
they want to talk about, right? We can't predict it. I'm
Yeah.
going to fail, right? Every year somebody tells me, this is the funny part. Every year somebody will tell me, you have too many soft skills based sessions. But every
Okay.
year somebody comes to me, multiple people come to me and say, that session was the one that changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every single year. And so much so that we contemplated creating a soft skills conference.
Yeah.
But we're not going to do that. But even picking those sessions is intentional, right? Because we all need to work on who we are. I mean, you have to.
Yeah. I mean, I can just use my experience, right? Like, I spoke about working from home before COVID. So before COVID, I had a talk on working from home. I did it at
Before it
that
was cool.
conference. Before it was cool. Before it was forced. And like, I remember like jokingly telling my wife, like, I'm gonna be lucky if there's like 5 people in this room, because nobody wants to work from, like, nobody like has the opportunity to work from home. Literally, they're
Right.
like, the room is full. There's people sitting in the hallway, like cross-legged, like, and for me, I was just like, okay, this makes sense. And the like, I was fortunate enough to get the videos put on the Pluralsight, and I occasionally get reached out to by people saying, "Hey, I came across your Pluralsight talk you did on working from home, and it was really impactful for me."
Hmm.
And I mean, in general, it's interesting that to hear you say that you get feedback there's too many soft skill conversations, or sessions or whatever you want to say. But as somebody who's been an attendee at that conference, when you so they have this concept of open spaces there, which basically are just I don't know, is it safe to say they're like informal breakouts or groups of conversation, right? That yeah. So like it's
Yeah,
just an opportunity for people to talk about things that are not in the session catalog, right?
that's right. Yep.
And you'll see like on the list of all the like the ones that have the most people that are interested in having a open space about it are soft skills, because I
Oh yeah.
think it's
Okay.
safe to say, and this is just me making a very bold, not bold statement, in general, tech, people that are in tech, they have challenges sometimes with soft skills.
Well,
Um,
I mean,
and I
yeah,
don't,
I'll
yeah,
take it a step further and say, and I tell speakers this all the time, like, or potential speakers, like, don't talk about shit you can Google.
yeah,
Like, what's the value in that? I mean, so much content is created. Like, please don't talk about intro to React. Like, that's been done 1,000 times.
sure,
Like, it's on YouTube.
yeah,
Unless you've got some like magical thing about that, like, what's your spin on it? Like, why do people care about you? And I think that that leads to that point of like, you either can't get this stuff,
yeah,
or it's kind of, you know, is tech an awkward industry if you want to play the persona games?
sure,
Maybe.
yeah,
There are certainly, it's a deep and wide place. And the stigmatisms in some
yeah,
cases are true, but those stigmatisms exist in other places too.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's not really fair for me to say that there's a soft skill problem, but I think one thing in general that people in tech would love to learn more about is to, like, for instance, maybe you're an individual contributor, you want to be a manager, right?
totally.
Like learning
Yep.
skills on how to be a better manager, a better people person,
Yep.
learning how to effectively communicate in meetings, learn how to manage your career in a really effective way. Like these are things that we don't get the time to focus as a part of our day job. Like it's our responsibility to figure that out because it's out, quote unquote, outside of our job description, right?
Yep.
But it's a part of our life description. Um, and I think it's really, really important to like soft skills. Like every technology conference has a soft skill track for a reason.
That's right.
Like whether it's a Microsoft technology conference or a polyglot one or one that's about databases, like there's always 4 or 5 sessions that are about personal skills or personal
Yep.
development, because that's, I think you could probably, there's probably data on this that you probably have seen. Like those are typically like the most engaging sessions, like
Yeah.
in general, because I think to your point, there's so much content out there. I can consume, I can learn basically anything tech related if I Google search best good
Yep.
enough or YouTube search good enough. But one thing that I can't learn most of the time is someone's personal story or their personal experiences around a particular topic that transcends technology.
Yeah.
And I think that's like that just kind of, it's clear to me. So I just think it's funny that people actually tell you like there's too many soft skill tracks. Like, okay, then
But
go to one of the technical ones.
well, and sometimes, I mean, arguably so, I think a lot of people go to a conference for the wrong reason, right? They go because
That's
they
fair.
think they're going to just jam in all this education, and in some cases that's true. And I don't fault them because their manager is on them saying you can't really go to this unless you can bring back,
Yeah.
whatever, $1,000 worth of value and then disperse it across the team so that it's
Yeah.
blah blah
Yeah.
blah. It's like
Yeah.
that shit doesn't really work either. So they've gone in with kind of the wrong mindset, and there are so many other things that happen around that if you're not looking, you miss, right?
Mm-hmm.
You miss the hallway conversations.
Yep.
You miss the fact that you could have um, lunch with maybe a keynote or somebody else. You miss the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon because
Yeah.
this person knows this person to get you to that person. And I think if people led with a little intentionality, they would realize that on the flip side, the money that was spent, right? Because I think about it as like, hey, there's lost dollars for a company or
Sure.
a ticket price, whatnot. Um, the money that was spent would well pay for itself
Yes.
if you just kind of went into it. It'd be like I used to back in the day. There was a company called Developmentor, and usually it was an author of a book who was going to teach a week-long class, and it'd be a deep dive. Well, I would read the book before the class, and I hate reading, but I would read the book before the class so that when I went to the class, I already had formulated questions where I
Yeah.
could spend better time with that author to figure out where I needed to go next, right?
Yeah. In your
And so,
experience, sorry, go ahead.
no, I mean, I think you just right use your time wisely, right?
Yeah.
Try to make sure you're getting the most value out of it. And sometimes, look, maybe the most value is kicking back and taking a break. Like
Yeah.
that's good too.
Yeah, I can tell you as, to use your experience, right? Like you had a better experience than probably every other attendee of that event because you were prepared and the speaker knew you were prepared and wanted to engage with you more because you put the time and effort outside of the thing into it, right?
For
Like
sure.
the amount of times I see this not just in work but in general, like if you just put a little bit of effort in, people are far more engaged with you.
Oh, for
Like
sure.
if somebody shows up to like a talk that I have done or whatever, or a live stream or whatever, and they ask me a question that they could easily have figured out the answer to.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, I'll answer for you and I'll be cordial and I'll be polite and all of that. But in my head, I'm like, how do you go about your day not being able to get that first level of questions answered for yourself? And
Yep.
that's probably a hot take, but I mean, in general, like that's how I see it. Maybe I'm just a bit more
No,
calloused in that area.
listen. I I live in this I don't know world of service, and I've got a tech company on the side that I do consulting and all that. But if somebody comes to me and is like, "Hey, how did you do this thing with GraphQL? And can you explain this to me? I've got these 5 questions." Shit, I'll put everything to the side and give them
Yeah.
an hour's worth of time,
Yeah.
2 hours worth of time to teach them, just to see them get further ahead. And hell, I've converted teams to using other stacks, and I haven't seen a dollar of it. And
You
I don't know.
monster.
I
You
mean,
monster.
but it's back to that thing of
Yeah.
like, there's people who are like who put in the effort, and then you realize like there's a whole tribe of other people who will like exactly give you that much plus.
Yeah.
And when people realize it, then they realize, shit, I found a tribe of folks who are there, who are batting for me to go be awesome. And, um, it's sad to say, but you got to show up, right?
Yeah.
You gotta take a step. You got to put it out there. I know it can feel vulnerable, but man, I see a lot of people giving a lot of help to folks that have given them increases in
Mm-hmm.
their raises, have found them new jobs, that have mentored them, that have um, just it's. I think that's special to tech. I feel like there's this energy, even though at times it can be super toxic. There's this energy of people who want to see nothing more than everybody else succeed,
Yep.
because we all share a bit of the same thing, right? We've all
Yep.
been on a project. We've all had that manager. We've all had those ship times. We all speak a bit of a common language, regardless of where we are in the world, regardless of the tech stack. It's all kind of the same,
Yeah.
and that's pretty cool. I mean, I hope we're able to kind of influence the good and all that. I mean, that's our goal.
Yeah. And all of that I think totally resonates. And I think, and this is probably the last thing I want to talk about related to that I think honestly is probably one of the greatest things from a how am I gonna like a personal standpoint as an attendee or a speaker, right? Like the ability to bring your family along with you, right? Like, and I know that like that family is very very important to you, and that whole idea is great. But just the idea of like I hate going to conferences by myself. Like, I just hate it because it's like I
Sure.
sit in a hotel room. Maybe I'll have a little bit of networking experiences, but for the most part, I'm sitting in my own hotel room, right?
Yep.
Um, and the opportunity to bring my family along during those times allows me to build memories with my family when I typically don't have the opportunity to.
Yep.
So, like, and not only do you allow family to come, but family is a part of the conference too. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
my wife literally, like the last time we were at that conference last summer, was like, I don't understand how there's just not like this, like conferences just for kids. Like, because watching my 6 year old, my 4 year old run around like crazy, have fun, learn from teenagers how to do robotics, all sorts of really, really cool things, like, that's like building amazing memories I'm never going to forget. Like, I'm never
Yep.
going to forget, like, my kid getting to like roll around like a BB-8 like Star Wars character that somebody like built, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean, that sort of thing is just great. And it just it plants seeds for kids to be creative. And I'd love to
Yep.
kind of hear, obviously when you're building out that and that the whole idea of the family track, like, what was the overall goal? Was it to just, like you said, build this community that involves family, not just technical folks?
Uh, uh, it was kind of twofold, right? One was to create exposure.
Sure.
One of the best parts about Barack Obama being president is that he was black and that he painted a scenario or an option for another young black man to be a
Sure.
president,
Yeah.
right? He could visualize himself and a girl. Well, we haven't had any girl presidents, but um, it would be equally as important. And I think, um, 12 years ago, there was just enormous amount of talk about not enough women in tech, and
Hasn't
there still
changed.
is.
Hasn't changed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But my take was like, if you're not going to fix the problem by walking out and like having a bigger marketing campaign, it's like, we need women. Like, that's not
Yeah.
going to work. My thing was like, we should be starting younger to create exposure so kids, girls and boys, right, would have that as an option in their mind later in life, right? Oh, I saw that this girl did this thing, or I saw that this boy did this thing. Um, and that's what kind of started to stitch in the family, aspects of things. The second piece of like, when is it successful, for me was a measurement of when do adults go to kids sessions,
Yes.
because we have such a big generational gap. And I have to attribute this actually to my son. um, you know they my son, who's 15, he's never lived in a non-tech house, non-world without a touch screen.
Sure.
Right? His perception of the world is completely different than that of mine. And how he uses Snapchat and these other platforms is different than how we use them, right?
Yep.
Their culture is different. And so I always thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if the adults were equally as interested as the things that the kids were presenting? Um, I, to this day, think we have done a really horrible job. I don't feel like we've really found our stride with the family stuff. Now, I say that knowing that in 2019 there was 650, kids and spouses. But I think it's a hard, I don't want to say space, but a hard thing to just balance of age groups and activities and learning and mentoring and um, what does it mean? Food's a big issue for families because
Hmm.
food's drastically expensive. So, um, and in Texas, right, the times don't line up great. So it's going to be a little different there than it is in Wisconsin, right? We picked the
Yep.
height of travel season in Wisconsin, which has other has the advantage that people can bring their families. So it's great. I think I love seeing the kids. I love seeing the kids grow up. I've written recommendations for colleges. We've employed one of them. I It's super, super cool. It's super cool to meet the spouses, right? To see the whole Isaac, right? To see
Yeah.
your kids, to see your wife. In fact, I think it was your short stack that went off running down
We don't want to talk
the
about that.
yeah.
For
Well,
the
okay,
people paying attention, I lost a kid
right, but
at
it
that
was my
conference.
kids that were tracking it down,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And
Yeah.
and that was like they were just doing that, and that sense of like community where you know it's not like I instructed my kids to go do that. They just saw here's a kid kind of running off, and they just decided to kind of go follow, and that like goodwill, you see that kind of permeate throughout when spouses are there, when other kids are around, and it's just cool. Like it becomes like this backyard barbecue that you
Yeah.
hear about the spouse, you hear about the kids. Well, now here's the real life version of that kid. So
Yeah.
um,
It's
I
great. Yeah.
I look forward to continue to, I don't want to say evolve it, but we always try to get a little bit better with it each year. Um, last year was fun. We really did it differently. And there are some things I think that we learned there that can go forward. And, we'll see. We'll see as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean in general, like again, like to talk about building memories. Like my wife and I will never forget losing my kid at a conference center. Like we're never gonna forget that. He's gonna be in his 30s, and we're gonna say, "Do you remember when we were at that conference in Wisconsin, and we found you, and you were literally sitting there, and all these nice women were hanging out around you, and you were just like
Oh, yeah,
eating, like
totally.
sucking on a lollipop, like he's just living his best life." But for us,
Yep.
we were obviously panicked. But I remember just the general feeling of like my wife's obviously panicking because
Oh, yeah, totally.
wives tend to panic.
Of
Um,
course.
and I'm
Why
like, it's gonna be
anybody
okay.
would.
He can't go very far. His legs are like 6 inches long. Um,
Yep.
and it was just like I just felt safe because I knew you, I knew your wife, I knew
Yep.
everybody, all the volunteers who were involved. I knew that nothing bad was gonna happen to that kid. And I think in general, like it just really shows like the effort that you and everybody who puts on, whether they're paid or not, onto making that conference great. And I can only just tell people that if you get the opportunity to speak at that conference, be an attendee at that conference, have your company sponsor that conference, like you're going to get great value. That's the only marketing thing I'm going to say about this during this. But I mean, in general, uh, it's true.
Yeah. I appreciate the kind words. And I remember it too, right? Like there's one of the preps in the meetings, ahead of time is like lost child, or I mean, we've had we had a kid have a stroke. We had
Mm,
things happen, right? And you
yeah,
have to prepare for them. And those are things that we didn't set out to do. I didn't set out to be a conference organizer.
sure.
That's not something I ever tell people. But right, you do have to organize a conference in its very definition. So you kind
Yeah.
of have to put that in your job title.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about a bit earlier, right? Like all these things that are like outside of your purview. You're like, oh, like I love developer community. Let's just try to do a conference, not knowing that, like you said earlier, there's lots of phone calls, lots
Yep.
of
Contracts.
contracts, lots of discussions that you think that you would never be having with people.
Yep.
I mean, something as simple as like I can only imagine like, okay, let's figure out the food that we can bring in that all of our attendees and everybody that's involved is going to enjoy, and we're accommodating every dietary restriction that exists, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean, it's I can
That's
only
conversations with chefs.
yep,
That's conversations with how much staff. That's conversations with availability of goods. That's how much, do you think you need and can serve in prep times? And, um, you know, our food bill in 2019 was probably, I don't know, 300. 300 grand. Like, it's not like it's a little amount of money.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's always, all of it, as it gets bigger, it just becomes, the scale becomes odd. When FedEx comes
Odd.
and drops you a whole truck full of shirts, you're like, that's a lot of shirts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that was a whole FedEx truck.
Yeah. That's,
What the hell am I going to do with this?
yeah. I mean, yeah, I can, yeah. No, I mean, it's awesome. And I think the reason why you're able to laugh about it is because you act like you care about these things. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of conference organizers that they might not care as much about the community they're building with their conferences, and that's probably not fair for a lot of folks. But I think in general,
We
like
do
it's
care about the
quite
details.
clear. Yeah, it's quite clear that you care,
Yeah.
and
And that's,
yeah,
that's from the time you hit our website to the interactions and email, like everything in between. Like, it is a thing that we're trying to do every day of the year and live by. Um, and so I do think that makes us drastically different than anybody else.
sure, yeah. Um, I mean, like I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and as we're about to wrap up, I think one of the things I love hearing from you is like you've been at it for 12 years now, and yet you're still trying to solve the problems that you had 12 years ago. You're just using different tools to do it, right? Whether it's figuring out better ways to be more efficient with, reaching out to the community, engaging with folks. Like these are all things I don't think the problems never really go away. They just mutate into different problems,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I think right now, one of the things that's the hardest is some of the problems that we had early on have kind of come back.
mm-hmm.
Early on, getting the name out there was a big deal, right? You would have to go tell people, like, it was a brand new entity. Well, now we've had COVID, and as a business, you've had people hiding, right? They're behind a firewall, or they're at home. They're not thinking about that kind of stuff. Many things have closed up and aren't there anymore. And getting back in that frame of reference has proved challenging. Um, companies aren't some companies aren't sending folks to things, and uh, that's been interesting.
Yeah,
It's been difficult to kind of wrap our head around. It's been difficult to uh, deal with. At times, maybe it feels a little bit like a blowback,
yeah,
or we're not doing kind of what we were doing well. But times are just different, and I think you can try to react to them and change and move forward, or you can pretend like they're not different. And I don't know. I like
yeah,
we kind of hit it head on. Like, just, it is what it is. Let's
yeah.
keep on trucking.
Yeah, I mean, again, like it's great to hear that like you can like based on this conversation you could tell that there's still like a lot of like raw passion about solving these
Yeah.
problems. And I want to thank you so much for, talking about them with me. And as we wrap up, I let folks that might not be aware of that conference or that.us. It's literally in a search bar that.us. You'll find all of the stuff that you need. But anything else other than that, Clark? Is there anything else that you'd like to part with?
I would say, I think this is a time. I think we're in a time right now where, like, if people want to give, right, give a little bit of their own privilege or a little bit of help, and it may not seem like a lot, but help out the other conference organizers and meetups. Tell somebody, get involved. I don't care if it's that conference or your own thing that's out there. I think this is the time where people need people more than ever. You can get involved online. You can get involved in person. Sharing that these things exist with others. You'd be surprised how many people just don't know about the other thing.
Yeah,
And you probably work next to them, or you've been there. So, I would challenge people to step out a little bit. We often offer, a place for people to come to get help, to learn how to speak and all that. And it's interesting how many people don't show. So, uh, go tell somebody about us. Go tell somebody about somebody else. Get involved a little bit and find your tribe, and know that the world that we live in is ever changing, and whatever. We've made it through polio and
Yep.
chicken pox and all this other shit. Like, this is just, it's fine. We're going to be fine. It's going to be
What
okay.
wise words. Um,
Yeah.
so
Even though
and
I compare the graph of the Spanish flu to the graph of COVID and everything's,
yeah,
the reality is it's fine. You know, it's going to be just fine.
yeah, and I think as long as there's folks like you who are trying to still engage in meaningful ways, I think that's completely spot on. Like we're gonna be totally fine
Yeah.
with folks like you kind of leading that charge.
I mean,
And
arguably, we should be better, right? We should have all learned a little something from this and taken it away to, you know, how to work together online, how to create acoustic space, how to, have a better balance of home and life, right?
yeah,
Like, I think there are a lot of lessons that get learned from this. We probably won't realize them for a long time, and gotta still get involved, right? Don't
yeah,
don't hide it. Don't hide. I think that's the worst thing you can do for your career.
that's spot on. I completely agree with you. That's yeah. No, I got nothing else to say. Um, I think, as we're wrapping up, the last question that I always love to ask my guests is, so if you can think of the, technology, open source, the community around it, and you only had one word to describe it, what would that word be for you?
Oh shit.
That's not a really great word to use, Clark.
No, actually, it's two, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, that's fine.
What would I describe? How would I describe it? Huh. Um, I kind of, want to go to collaborative. Um,
Yeah,
I think we have a unique place where people can work together differently. If you think about, I mean, I guess if you're a plumber, two people can be laying the same pipes and putting them together, but the amount of artistic, creative side of trying to solve a hard problem and being able to work through that with somebody else, to solve the greater good is pretty inspiring. So, um, I don't know. I think we have a pretty cool industry. I think I don't think there's anything such where you can take some ones and zeros and go change the world. Like, that's a
this is
pretty.
this is very true. This is
I
very
mean,
true.
you need a computer. Like, I would challenge people to say, like, your barrier to entry to go do something is so minimal. Um, yeah, like, come on, you can go get cloud shit. Like, it's amazing what you can get. And thus, maybe, donate to some people so that they can
Yeah,
continue to give you great stuff. Like, go buy their course, go buy them a cup of coffee, whatever it
yeah,
is. It only helps you, right? If you think about all the time Wes Boss has put in a training, or Scott Talinsky, any of those guys, shit, I give them $100 every time.
yeah.
Whatever.
I mean, it's
That's
very true. I totally agree. Like the giving back thing is really really important, and it's super impactful for the people that you're giving back to specifically.
for sure.
And that's it. I mean, we've talked for a little bit over an hour, and Clark, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This has been a great conversation, as I knew it was going to be, and I was telling you it was going to be before. Yeah, I mean, in general, I think I asked you already if you had any parting words, but maybe an opportunity for you to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, go check out that.us, or go to thatconference.com. If you want to come, we got some discount codes there. We'll be in Texas in May. End of May, we'll be in the Wisconsin Dells in the end of July. COVID numbers are going down.
Yeah,
It's good. We got this.
yeah.
We did it before.
Looking for speakers and attendees and
Yep,
sponsors. So if
that's
you feel
right.
like you can be one of those things, please do it.
Yep. File a bug on our GitHub repository if
That
you
too.
find something. Just be super nice about it because I read them.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this chat. Thank you again so much, Clark, for hopping on chatting with me, and for everybody
Thank you.
tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your
Absolutely.
day. Take
Will
care.
do.